The Arizona Territory of 1871 tested every soul who dared traverse its merciless desert expanses. But what prospector Jack Holstead discovered at Devil's Canyon, that scorching September morning would redefine the meaning of trust between sworn enemies. A young Apache warrior, barely 16 and dying from infected wounds after a cavalry ambush, lay helpless among the rocks with vultures circling overhead. What Jack chose to do in that moment, surrendering his only rifle to arm a member of the tribe that settlers feared most, would create a debt of honor that transcended racial hatred. Chapter 1. The Dying Warrior. The September sun of 1871 transformed Devil's Canyon into a furnace where the Arizona Territory tested the endurance of any soul foolish enough to traverse its labyrinth of red rock and scorching sand. Jack Holstead guided his mule through the narrow passage with the practiced caution of a man who had survived 3 years prospecting these hostile lands, his weathered hands gripping both the lead rope and his Winchester rifle with equal determination. At 35, he had learned that survival in Apache territory required constant vigilance, as death could arrive with the silence of a sidewinder or the sudden fury of a war party. The canyon walls rose like ancient monuments on either side, their stratified layers telling geological stories that stretched back to times when oceans covered this desert. Jack knew every twist and shadow of this particular route, having discovered a modest silver vein deeper in the canyon that provided enough to sustain his solitary existence without attracting the attention of larger mining operations. His monthly journey to extract and transport the silver had become routine, though he never allowed familiarity to breed the carelessness that had killed so many prospectors before him. The circling of vultures ahead disrupted the morning's pattern with their ominous spiral against the cloudless sky. These carrion birds served as the desert's newspapers, announcing death with their patient circles that could be seen for miles across the flat expanses. Jack counted 7 of the massive birds, their black wings catching thermals as they waited for whatever lay below to finish its transition from life to meal. Experience suggested they had found one of the desert's many victims, perhaps a traveler who had underestimated the water required for crossing, or wildlife that had succumbed to the brutal heat. As Jack rounded a formation of weathered sandstone that locals called Devil's Throne, the scene that greeted him told a story written in blood and desperation across the canyon floor. Scattered brass casings from Spencer carbines glinted in the morning sun, their military origin unmistakable to anyone familiar with cavalry weapons. Hoof prints of shod horses had churned the sandy soil in patterns that indicated rapid pursuit and evasive maneuvering, while several dark stains on the rocks marked where bullets had found their targets. Movement among the rocks caught Jack's attention, something more substantial than the lizards that typically inhabited these shadows. His rifle rose instinctively to his shoulder as he approached with the careful steps of someone who understood that wounded animals, whether 4-legged or 2-legged, could prove most dangerous when cornered. The metallic scent of blood grew stronger as he navigated the scattered boulders, mixing with the desert sage in a combination that triggered primitive warnings in his brain. The Apache warrior lay crumpled against a boulder like a broken doll, his youth immediately apparent despite the warrior's paint that decorated his face in patterns meant to invoke supernatural protection. Jack estimated the boy couldn't be more than 16 summers, though the harsh realities of Apache life often aged faces beyond their years. Dark blood had pooled beneath him from multiple wounds, the worst being a cavalry saber slash across his ribs that had festered in the desert heat, creating the sweet, sick smell of infection that attracted the patient vultures overhead. The boy's eyes flickered open at Jack's approach, revealing depths of pain mixed with the fierce pride that characterized his people even when facing death. His hand moved weakly toward a broken lance beside him, a gesture of defiance that would have been admirable if not so pathetically futile. Jack recognized the symptoms of advanced dehydration combined with blood loss. The cracked lips, sunken eyes, and skin that had lost its elasticity, creating a death mask on what should have been a young face full of life. Jack understood the enormous implications of what he contemplated as he studied the dying Apache. Territorial law explicitly forbade providing aid to hostile Indians, with penalties ranging from imprisonment to vigilante execution by settlers who viewed such assistance as treason against their race. The recent Camp Grant massacre had demonstrated the depths of hatred between Apache and white settlers, making any gesture of mercy potentially fatal for the one who offered it. Chapter 2. The Rifle Surrender. Jack's decision to save the Apache youth required immediate action that would test every skill he had acquired during his years in the Arizona Territory. He constructed a makeshift travois from mesquite branches and canvas, carefully transferring the unconscious warrior while trying to minimize further damage to his infected wounds. The journey back to his hidden camp deeper in Devil's Canyon took 3 agonizing hours, with Jack stopping frequently to ensure his patients still breathed and to scan the horizon for cavalry patrols that would execute them both without hesitation. The abandoned mine shaft that served as Jack's base camp provided blessed relief from the merciless sun, its cool depths offering the stable environment necessary for medical treatment. Jack had chosen this location precisely for its concealment and access to a small underground spring that provided precious water year-round. He laid the Apache youth on his own bedroll, sacrificing comfort for the practical necessity of keeping his patient elevated and dry during the critical healing period ahead. The warrior's wounds told stories of remarkable endurance that commanded Jack's respect despite the cultural divide between them. Beyond the infected saber slash, Jack discovered 2 bullet wounds that had miraculously avoided vital organs, though infection had begun its deadly work in the desert heat. He cleaned each injury with whiskey from his precious supply, knowing that the alcohol's sting meant the difference between recovery and the gangrene that claimed so many lives on the frontier. For 3 days, the Apache drifted between consciousness and delirium, speaking in his native tongue during fever dreams that Jack couldn't understand but recognized as containing names and places of deep significance. During lucid moments, the youth's dark eyes tracked Jack's movements with intelligence that suggested education beyond what most whites assumed about Apache warriors. Through careful observation, Jack noticed the intricate beadwork on the boy's moccasins and the specific patterns of his face paint, markers that indicated standing within his band's hierarchy. On the 4th day, the fever broke, and genuine communication became possible through the universal language of gestures and expressions. The Apache youth pointed to himself and spoke a name that sounded like White Hawk, though Jack understood that the English translation probably missed nuances present in the original tongue. Through elaborate pantomime supplemented by drawings in the sand, White Hawk conveyed his story of the cavalry ambush that had scattered his hunting party, his desperate flight through the canyon, and his gradual weakening from blood loss until collapsing where Jack had discovered him. Jack shared his own identity through similar methods, establishing himself as a solitary prospector with no connection to the military forces that had pursued White Hawk. The youth's relief at this revelation was palpable, though wariness remained in his bearing that spoke of justified mistrust toward white men. As days passed and Jack's consistent care proved genuine, White Hawk began demonstrating his own knowledge through small gestures, identifying edible plants Jack had overlooked, predicting weather changes through signs invisible to untrained eyes, and most importantly, warning of approaching danger through his superior hearing. The moment of crisis arrived on the 10th day, when White Hawk had recovered enough strength to attempt standing. Through increasingly urgent gestures, he communicated his need to return to his people before they concluded him dead and performed mourning rituals that would sever his spiritual connections to the tribe. Jack understood the profound implications of what White Hawk conveyed. Without reaching his band soon, the youth would become spiritually orphaned, a fate worse than death in Apache culture. The greater problem became immediately apparent as White Hawk prepared for his departure. The youth possessed no weapon for the dangerous journey through territory, now crawling with cavalry patrols seeking Apache survivors from the ambush. His broken lance lay useless, while his bow had been lost during the chase. Jack watched the young warrior fashion a crude knife from stone, a tool barely adequate for cutting food, much less defending against the numerous threats between Devil's Canyon and the Chiricahua Mountains, where his people sheltered. Jack's Winchester rifle stood propped against the cave wall, its polished steel and worn stock representing his only reliable defense in a land where death arrived without warning. The weapon had saved his life countless times, its .44 caliber authority commanding respect from both human and animal threats. Yet watching White Hawk prepare for certain death armed only with stone and courage, Jack faced a decision that would define the remaining course of his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Chapter 3: Bandit Ambush. 6 weeks after White Hawk's departure, the October heat had given way to the cooler temperatures that made autumn the Arizona Territory's most deceptively peaceful season. Jack Holstead continued his solitary prospecting routine, though the absence of his Winchester rifle created a vulnerability that gnawed at his consciousness with every shadow and unexpected sound. He had acquired an old Navy Colt revolver from a traveling merchant, but the pistol's limited range and accuracy provided cold comfort in a land where threats often announced themselves at distances beyond its effectiveness. The Mexican bandit gang led by Eduardo Vasquez had terrorized the southern Arizona Territory for 3 years, their raids leaving a trail of murdered prospectors and burned settlements from Tombstone to the Chiricahua Mountains. Vasquez himself had earned a reputation for calculated cruelty that transcended the usual violence of frontier banditry, his practice of torturing victims for hidden gold locations making him feared even among the lawless elements that inhabited the borderlands. Federal authorities had placed a $1,000 bounty on his head, though none who pursued him into the desert maze ever returned to collect. Jack first sensed danger during his October return to Devil's Canyon, when he noticed fresh horse tracks overlaying his usual trail. The hoof prints bore the distinctive narrow shape of Mexican cavalry shoes rather than the broader American style, immediately triggering his heightened awareness. Someone had been scouting his regular route, learning his patterns with the patient observation that preceded a carefully planned ambush. The tracks numbered at least 8 riders, far more than Jack could handle with just his inadequate pistol. The ambush materialized with professional precision as Jack entered the narrowest section of Devil's Canyon, where vertical walls eliminated any possibility of escape except forward or backward along the trail. Vasquez appeared first, his silver-decorated saddle and expensive clothing marking him as someone who had profited greatly from his chosen profession. 7 additional bandits emerged from concealed positions among the rocks, their rifles trained on Jack with steady hands that spoke of extensive experience in such situations. Vasquez's scarred face split into a predatory smile as he recognized Jack's vulnerable position, speaking in accented English that carried mockery beneath its surface politeness. The bandit leader explained with theatrical pleasure how they had been watching Jack for weeks, noting his regular trips into the canyon and the silver where he extracted. They knew about his hidden camp, his water source, and most importantly, his isolation from any possible help. The absence of a rifle across Jack's saddle had been the final detail that convinced Vasquez to strike. The bandits' demands went beyond simple robbery, as Vasquez understood that prospectors often concealed their richest discoveries to avoid attracting competition. He wanted the location of Jack's primary vein, convinced that the modest or Jack transported represented merely surface pickings from a much richer deposit. When Jack truthfully insisted that no such bonanza existed, Vasquez's expression darkened with the promise of interrogation methods that had broken stronger men than a solitary prospector. Jack calculated his options with a rapid assessment that frontier survival demanded, finding each possibility worse than the last. His revolver remained holstered but useless against 8 rifles at range, while attempting to flee would result in immediate death from multiple directions. Surrender meant torture and eventual death after Vasquez extracted whatever information he believed Jack possessed. The canyon walls that had provided shelter for so long now became the boundaries of what would likely be his tomb. The bandits began their systematic approach, maintaining overlapping fields of fire while closing the distance to prevent any desperate escape attempt. Vasquez drew his own ornate revolver, its pearl handle gleaming in the afternoon sun, as he explained his preference for beginning interrogations with shots to non-vital areas, allowing victims to fully appreciate their situation before more serious measures became necessary. The other bandits laughed at their leader's description, their casualness suggesting extensive familiarity with such proceedings. As shadows lengthened across Devil's Canyon and the bandits prepared to begin their grim work, Jack found himself thinking about White Hawk and wondering if the young Apache had survived his journey home, whether the Winchester rifle had served him well in whatever challenges he had faced, and if perhaps somewhere in the Chiricahua Mountains, a warrior remembered the white prospector who had chosen trust over fear. Chapter 4: Apache Justice. The war cry that erupted from the canyon walls above transformed the afternoon air into something electric with sudden violence, a sound that froze every bandit in place with the paralysis of men who recognized their own mortality approaching. The Apache call echoed between the rock faces with supernatural resonance, multiplying until it seemed an entire army had materialized from the desert itself. Vasquez's confident expression crumbled into something primal and fearful as he recognized the tactical disadvantage of being trapped in the very canyon that had served as his perfect ambush site. White Hawk appeared first on the ridge above, his silhouette against the October sky, carrying the unmistakable outline of Jack's Winchester rifle raised high in warrior salute. The young Apache had transformed during their 6 weeks apart, his bearing now radiating the confidence of someone who had faced death and emerged stronger. Behind him, 12 Apache warriors materialized along both canyon walls, their positions creating overlapping fields of fire that turned the bandits from predators into prey within seconds. The battle that followed demonstrated the vast difference between banditry and warfare, between men who killed for profit and warriors who had spent generations perfecting the art of desert combat. Vasquez's men fired wildly at targets that appeared and vanished like smoke, their shots echoing uselessly, while Apache arrows found marks with deadly precision. 2 bandits fell immediately, arrows protruding from their chests before they could even identify their attackers' positions. Vasquez attempted to rally his men toward the canyon entrance, but White Hawk had positioned his warriors to seal every escape route with methodical precision. The young warrior descended the canyon wall with the fluid grace of someone born to such terrain, Jack's rifle steady in his hands as he advanced. When Vasquez raised his pearl-handled revolver toward Jack in desperate spite, White Hawk's shot rang out with decisive finality, the bandit leader crumpling with a bullet through his shooting arm that sent his weapons spinning into the dust. The remaining bandits threw down their weapons with the swift calculation of men who understood that surrender offered their only chance at survival. The Apaches descended from their positions with the controlled discipline of warriors who had already won, their movements economical and purposeful as they secured the prisoners. White Hawk approached Jack with measured steps that carried ceremonial weight, his expression combining the joy of reunion with the solemnity of debt being repaid. The young warrior extended Jack's Winchester rifle with both hands, the gesture carrying layers of meaning that transcended simple return of property. Through a mixture of broken English learned during his recovery and expressive gestures, White Hawk conveyed how the rifle had enabled him to return to his people with honor, how it had provided food during his journey, and most importantly, how it had served as proof of the strange tale he told about a white prospector who had chosen mercy over racial hatred. The Apache band's leader, an older warrior whose presence commanded immediate respect, approached Jack with gifts that marked formal adoption into their tribe. A beaded belt of intricate craftsmanship, an eagle feather that signified warrior status, and most remarkably, a medicine pouch that would identify Jack as under Apache protection throughout the territory. These items represented acceptance that few white men had ever received, a transformation from potential enemy to recognized family member with all the obligations and privileges such status entailed. White Hawk explained, through improving English, how his band had been tracking Vasquez's gang for their own reasons, seeking vengeance for raids against Apache camps. The discovery that these same bandits threatened Jack had transformed a military operation into a rescue mission driven by honor debt. The timing had been nearly perfect, though White Hawk admitted they had been watching since dawn, waiting for the optimal moment to strike without endangering Jack in the crossfire. As the Apaches prepared to depart with their prisoners, who would face tribal justice for their crimes against both Apache and white victims, White Hawk clasped Jack's arm in the warrior's grip that signified brotherhood. The rifle that had changed hands and trust had returned, accompanied by something far more valuable, an alliance that would protect Jack throughout his remaining years in the Arizona Territory. If Jack's incredible act of trust moved you, hit subscribe for more legendary frontier stories. Would you have given away your only rifle? Comment below.